It looks different. The people aren't there. The life is not there. I'm not saying that the city is dead. I don't want people saying, "Oh, you're standing." No, but it is quite a bit different.
"40 Years of the Business Journal" is sponsored by Compco and these participating sponsors.
As people tell their kids, go to college, you need to be able to get a job. The other thing was you're not going to be able to find a job here. So now you see the next generation, the families who had, came up in the steel mill, their children not only went to school, they left. So on top of the industrialization of the area going down, us losing all these manufacturing jobs, we lost a lot of people because, hey, there's no place for them to work. And so they left the area. AFSCME represented the Job and Family Services. When I started there, it was still the Department of Public Welfare. So that's how far back I go. But AFSCME represented the agency. I became active in the union around 1986. I've actually been a member of AFSCME since '81. So I'm in my 43rd year as a member of the Green Machine, as we love to call it. But became active in the rank and file, started becoming more active on the state level, and just, continued to grow, got more involved politically. And the union actually came to me and said, have you thought about coming on staff? I said, maybe one day, but I didn't think I was ready. They said, give us a resume. And that was 1992. And I don't know if you remember, but Job and Family Services had a strike in 1991. It was the only strike that agencies had. I was chief shop steward at the time. It was rough, but it was considered, if you want to call a strike a success, because, during that time, we only had one person cross the line. We were able to resolve it within 2 weeks. And it kind of gave us some notoriety within the union. People saw us in a real leadership role in that way inside AFSCME. And so, they asked me to think about coming on board. And 1992, I went to work for AFSCME Ohio Council 8 as a staff representative. Part of AFSCME's core is the belief and the need to be politically active. As our name says, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, we represent public employees. Well, many of those public employees, either their bosses or someone who was appointed by the bosses is an elected official. And so it became crucial that the union be involved in politics. We always cared about who was the county commissioner, always. You always cared about who was the mayor because we represented the city of Youngstown employees. So we always cared about, several offices that were organized, or we saw as potential offices to be organized, because that would determine what kind of relationship they've had with the employees. So, politics and union go hand in hand when it comes to those unions like AFSCME that represent public employees.
Here are some of the more interesting figures that, A, you worked for directly as a consultant, and B, who you encountered through that role.
That's interesting. It wasn't always as a consultant. Some of the people that I worked with even when I was still on staff with AFSCME, because I took on a lot of political work as a staff representative. Yeah. I was also lead staff in charge of political activity for Mahoning and Columbiana counties for probably 10, 12 years when I was still at Council 8 before I retired. But one of the people who I think I worked with directly and I really got to know well, and I, to this day, truly have the utmost respect for, is former Governor Ted Strickland. And then, you know, as time progressed, and particularly after I started doing this work more of on a full-time basis as a consultant and not just helping out or working the campaign or being loaned out by the union, because that's what would happen,
Right.
you know. After you've been pretty successful and they figured you know what you're doing, then all of a sudden people are asking, hey, can you loan Jaladah out? Can we have her for the end of the campaign, you know? So I did that for, you know, several campaign cycles. I did it with President Obama's first campaign. I actually was a faith coordinator for this area. Did that with John Kerry's campaign for president. So there was a lot of different cases, a lot of different campaigns that I worked. But when I started consulting, some of the people, one of my favorite campaigns is, of course, Judge Carla Baldwin's. That was not just historical, but it was straight grassroots from the ground up. You know, this was her first time ever venturing into the political arena, and she trusted me, and I had to run the entire campaign. And even though it was local, that meant fundraising, that meant everything. Nobody wants to talk about this a lot, but a lot of the really controversial scandals and political corruption in this area was all Democrats. And, you know, at some point, you got to be accountable and you have to be responsible for that. And where I blame the party, which I'm a part of, is not saying, hey, we just can't do that. We're just not going to do that. We're not going to support someone who's been indicted. We're not going to get behind someone, you know, who's got all these issues going on. Instead of saying, okay, this is the incumbent, and we're gonna support them, even though, you know, they've got pending legal cases.
How would you say the area's fabric has changed since you began working, basically?
Probably one of the things that, and I see it all the time, is just what it looks like. You know, I grew up, you know, I was born in the 60s, or 1960 exactly. So I grew up with, you know, neighborhoods full and people working and houses and, you know, playgrounds, and it just looks different. I was coming home from church the other day. I live in Austintown Township. I go to church on the south side. I'm coming home, and there's streets where there's just vacant lots. And it looks different. The people aren't there. The life is not there. I'm not saying that the city is dead. I don't want people saying, oh, you know, you're standing. No, but it is quite a bit different.
What do you think most needs to change in this area to bring about the more positive outcomes that you would hope for?
You know, I'm going to go back to Jay Williams for a minute. And one of the things that former Mayor Williams said was that we need to start looking at the city in terms of what it is instead of what it used to be. And I think that every mayor has had that challenge. And I speak more about Youngstown, not just the area.
Right. Even
though I live in Austintown Township, I've been living in the township for 30 years this year. But Youngstown is the county seat, and it is the Youngstown metropolitan area. And it affects, you know, the valley. But I think we need to start dealing with what we have and trying to make the best of it instead of what it used to be. I'm going to give you a quick example. I was reading about what's going on with the Realty building. And I know it's devastating for a lot of people. But now I'm seeing this push for everybody to hold on to this building because of the historical significance. Are we more concerned about that? Or are we really concerned about trying to make sure that people are safe, that the hotel can reopen, and that we can get everything going as soon as possible? I get there's a historical connection, But sometimes you've got to move on. And if you're holding on to the past so hard that it's just taking more time to do what you need to do, which is move on, then you got to think about your priorities. I am optimistic because I think that there's some people here who genuinely care about what happens to the city, what happens to the valley, what happens to the townships and Mahoning County, and Trumbull for that matter. I do think that there are people invested in the area that care about what's going on, whether they live in the city limits or not. I'm one of those people. And I think that that's part of Youngstown's best gift. You know, I was telling someone, I was at a funeral. I was at a couple of funerals last week. But I was telling a friend, they were like, this is really nice. I said, you don't see this. I've been to funerals in other states. And the way that people come together in this valley when someone passes, and it seems so simple, but we take this stuff for granted. And there's just an absolute love for community here that you don't see in a lot of places. And not just, you know, it's different in Pennsylvania, it's different in West Virginia, it's different in New York, it's different in other places in Ohio. You know, people really do come together, they really do care about each other. From the people who are issuing the services, from the funeral home directors, to the churches, to the people that work in the cemetery, to the neighbors, the camaraderie of coming together, that still happens here. You know, that's never changed. And I don't think it ever will. I don't think it ever will. And I just think that's one of the city's greatest strengths.
"40 Years of the Business Journal" is sponsored by Comco and these participating sponsors.